Hi guys. I created this video to kind of help walk you through and ask you some questions for part one of Fahrenheit 451. This is a dystopian literature book, as we talked about in class, and there's a lot of things you need to think about as you're reading it, and hopefully you're picking up the main ideas as we go through. So this series of videos is to help kind of guide you. So got my trusty book here, and so going to go through there. So on the first page, we start right off with some figurative language, including similes and metaphors. If you look in the first paragraph, you're going to see at least 3 different metaphors. So look for a snake and conductor and some fireflies. So you need to ask yourselves, what's being compared here? Because that's how metaphors work, right? They compare 2 unlike objects. And it's very, very descriptive. Bradbury's sort of setting the tone of the piece. And like most dystopian literature, it's going to be a little dark. So you can kind of expect that. The next thing I wanted you to bring up is setting and tone, kind of going with those metaphors. So if you go to page 6, and it's a part where Montague first meets Clarice, and she's kind of surprised that he's a firefighter because he doesn't seem like the usual type. And she has kind of a tone about that, starting with, "And you must be the fireman." And she says it in a way that non-verbally she's sort of setting off a message. So kind of read through that and ask yourself, what is she sort of suggesting? Because what she's setting up here is giving us some clues about the kinds of characters that usually firemen are, and it's setting up a contrast between Montague and his colleagues. And so I want you to really pay attention to those things. The next thing, kind of going with Clarice, is she comments that he laughs in inappropriate times. So, like, is there an appropriate time to laugh? I don't know. But if you flip to your books on page 10, she says, "You laugh funny. You laugh when it's not funny, and other times you're very quick for an answer, almost as if he has all the answers memorized." This kind of leads into the theme of thought and independent thought. Like, what role does independent thought play throughout this? Clarice is clearly a free thinker, right? She's a girl that is creative and whimsical, and Montague has been raised to accept the rules of the society. And not until Clarice does he start questioning that. And it starts with things like laughter, like, what do we find funny? He finds her delightful and refreshing and funny. But sometimes he forgets why he's even laughing. And so that might be a little bit of nervousness, because we do that, right? We laugh when we're kind of nervous or unsure. But it also could be genuine pleasure in someone meeting someone so different than what he's used to. The next page I wanted you to pay attention to, or rather, I want to draw your attention to, is page 12. And this is when we first get introduced to Mildred. Of course, she's speaking at this point. So why doesn't she speak? What's her grand emergency? This is going to be a test question, so I'm not going to tell you the answer. No spoiler alerts. But what's the emergency with Mildred? And how does Montague feel when the authorities come in to remedy that emergency? Mildred's an interesting character as you go through the book. She's quite different from Montague. You should be looking at, how is their marriage set up? Is it a romantic one? Is it one of convenience? Is it government ordered? Like, how's their marriage set up? And what thoughts do you have about being in a relationship? Clarice asks him, and she has her own test, right? Asks him if he's in love. And so look for that moment, because it's a fairly important moment, because we see it on 2 different pages in this section, about 20 pages apart. And I'll draw that out in just a second. So I told you before, I want you to know what happened to Mildred. Please look up page 15 to see how the authorities deal with that, if you haven't already. The next thing I want to draw your eye to, or at least draw your attention to, first off, how's Mildred's reaction the next day after the emergency, right? What does she do? And how is this characteristic of Mildred through all of part one versus Montauk? Very, very different about the ways they think about events, life, things that are happening around them. What's real? What's really important? These are really big questions in this novel. So page 18 and 19 tells you a little bit more about like the grand emergency and what happened. I want you to think about what the role of TV is in this novel. It's very, very important to Mildred. They have something called 3 walls, which is like, think surround sound for stereo, but now it's surround sound also for visual, that you would have sound all the way around you, like on 3 sides. Mildred very much wants a 4th wall so that she would be encased in video and sound all the way around her. And but what is she watching, and how this was written in the 1950s? How similar is that to today's television? Bradbury seems to me having a conversation about mass media. You'll see it later on when Beatty talks to Montauk about the history of firemen. And he seems to be suggesting about Bradbury's idea of the media, which is funny in today's world when we talk so much about fake news and how people have used Facebook news sort of to slant the news one way or another for a particular purpose or candidate. So it's really interesting that these themes come up 50 years ago and how it might be used, how it might be seen as threatening, that the media is sort of the enemy of this book, right? It's very interesting. The next thing I would like to draw your attention to is, again, Clarice comes back up in page 23 and talks about her view on firefighters and what her view is and what her history of firefighters are. And Montauk has an interesting reaction to it. He differs from normal firefighters. So we have Clarice's history early on, and then later we're going to have Beatty's history. So I want you to be thinking, how do these compare and contrast? You can kind of expect me to test you on this later. So heads up, kiddos, this will be on the test. Also, you need to be able to describe the mechanical hound. Super important to the book. And Montauk's relationship with it. How does he describe it? What do you picture about the mechanical hound? And Montauk has a bit of a conspiracy theory in regards to it, and Beatty dismisses him, but it may be that super important to the book later on. So you need to understand Montauk's sort of fears and his response to it, and that's all on page 24. Even the firefighters have a game they play with a mechanical hound. And early on in his firefighting career, Montauk participated in the game. And now he finds the game a little bit disturbing and will actually physically remove himself from the game. And again, that removal, that distance and space sort of suggests that there might actually be space between Montauk and the other firefighters. So he must be different. Like it's important to pay attention to. Okay, so one of the things I wanted you to notice is throughout the book, the word ventilator, the ventilator grill comes up at least 4 times in this part. And on page 27, it comes up again. And it says, but Montauk did not move away, only thinking of the ventilator grill in the hallway at home and what lay hidden behind the grill. So I want you, when an author repeats themselves, it's normally on purpose, right? It's to get you to understand something. So What I would like you to do is think about, what is that ventilator grill? What does it symbolize? What is he worried about? Is it foreshadowing something new? Okay, going forward, sorry. I think it's on page 22. Oh, I wanted to go back to that. I talked about Clarice and love and relationships. And on page 22, I want you to read the dandelion sequence about what she uses the dandelions for, and then go to page 44 because it's brought up again and what's going on there. So be able to answer what happens there. There's an allusion on page 40. An allusion is a historical reference that references something in the past. So in the allusion, Beatty and Montague are talking about the woman with the books, and Montague says to Beatty, "Oh, she said Nicholas Ridley." And so do a quick search, find out who Nicholas Ridley is. Fairly important. He was a martyr, and find out what happened to him, and then ask yourself, why would Bradbury bring it up? Those are some of the questions you need to think about. Okay. I already talked a little bit about independent thought and the theme going throughout. And I want to skip to the end of the book now of that Beatty's giving the history of the firefighters, and he says we must all be alike. Not everyone is born free and equal, as the Constitution says. So think about this. We're Americans. We've been told from day one that we live in a land where every man is created equal. That's what it says, right? So what does it mean to be free and equal? And is the society, could you justify it is free or equal? And how does that work? And they go through some of the books. This is when Beatty brings up mass media, and he talks about the books that are burned and how all the things they led to. So as part of this, I've created, I gave you a link to a PDF that has all the burned books requested for 2016. I want you to look through that list and read the summaries, and then comment on our discussion forum about which book you're surprised or interested in that it's on the banned book list, and explain why you think it should be banned or why it should not, and some thoughts. Kind of spend a paragraph doing it, and then respond to one of your classmates. So as part of that, because I think it's really interesting to have this conversation about freedom of press in today's age, not just back in Bradbury's time. So another thing I wanted to talk about was I said about Mildred. Mildred seems to be clueless most times, but every now and then she pops up and seems to have a realization. And one of those times is on page 64. Montague's having a hard time with thinking about everything that's happened, about the fire with the woman, about Clarice disappearing, about what it means to be a fireman, about truth, all of these things. And he says, I don't want to. Mildred's response is to tune it out. Put those earbuds in, watch the 3 screens, or she says, go driving, get rid of those feelings. And he said, no, I want to hold on to it for a while. I want to think about it. And he said, I might even want to start reading books. And Mildred flat out, then suddenly she pays attention because she can't remember where she met him, but she has a good response to this one, or at least she has a response. And she says, no, they'd put us in jail. This is risky behavior. And so she seems to understand, although she doesn't ask why, she knows what's expected of her. And so kind of interesting things. And so Montague then makes a confession to her. What's the confession? Why does he make the confession? You should think about these terms. And what's Mildred's response? So that gets us through the end of part 1. Should be super interesting for all of you. So make sure that you answer those discussion questions and put those up on turnitin.com. And don't forget to respond on the forum about our banned books. Great. Have a great night. See you next week. Bye.